She sold it for $800. $800 for a burned-out wreck rusting in a forgotten garage. A car she called worthless. A problem solved. A chapter closed. 30-year-old billionaire Aurora Sterling signed the paperwork without reading it, handed the keys to a man she'd never remember, and walked away. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the gutted Ferrari sitting in that garage wasn't just a car. It was her father's last secret, a truth he'd carried alone for decades, and it was already changing hands. If you've ever watched something valuable get thrown away by someone who never bothered to look closer, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The Ferrari in the Ashes, Part 1. The estate sale started at 8 in the morning, but Jace Holloway had been parked outside the Sterling property since 6:45. He didn't have a reason he could explain out loud, not one that would make sense to anyone else anyway. He just had that feeling, the particular pull in his gut that had never once led him wrong when it came to cars. 22 years of opening hoods, tearing apart engines, coaxing broken things back to life, and Jace had learned to trust that feeling the same way some people trusted weather reports or stock tips. Except his feeling actually delivered. He sat in the cab of his truck with a paper cup of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder and a folded printout of the estate listing on the passenger seat. He'd read it 6 times. He'd read it 6 times because the description of the vehicle in Lot 47 was so vague, so deliberately unhelpful, that it told him more than a detailed description would have. 1 burned automobile, garage stored, condition unknown, sold as is. That was it. No make, no model, no year, no photos. Someone didn't want people asking questions. Jace took a long pull of the cold coffee and looked up at the Sterling house through the windshield. It was one of those old money properties that sat back from the road behind iron gates and ancient oak trees. The kind of house that had been beautiful once and was still impressive but wore its age like a man wearing a suit that used to fit. The brick had gone dark with decades of weather. The fountain in the circular drive had been drained and filled with dead leaves. Somewhere in the back, past the hedges and the detached garage complex, there was a burned car that nobody wanted to describe. His phone buzzed on the seat. "You're already there, aren't you?" His sister Marisol. He texted back. "Maybe." "Jace, you can't keep doing this. You have $17,000 in your account and a daughter starting 3rd grade in 6 weeks." He looked at the text for a moment. Then he put the phone face down on the seat and drank the rest of the coffee. The gates opened at 8:02 set. There were maybe 40 people working the estate sale. Most of them were antique pickers and furniture hunters, people who moved through rooms with practiced efficiency, tagging sofas and sideboards and boxes of silver. The kind of people who knew exactly what they were doing and what they were willing to pay before they walked through the door. Jace walked past all of them, past the dining room furniture and the vintage bar cart getting a crowd of admirers, past the rugs and the oil paintings and the china cabinet, straight through the house and out the back door. The garage complex was 3 separate structures, each one 3 bays wide. 2 of them were unlocked and empty, swept clean. The third one, the one furthest from the house, half hidden behind overgrown boxwoods, had a padlock on the center bay that hadn't been opened in a while. A woman from the estate management company was standing in front of it with a ring of keys, looking at her clipboard like she was hoping the clipboard would tell her which key to use. "Lot 47?" Jace said. She looked up. "You're the first one who's asked about it." "I know." She found the key on the 4th try. The padlock opened with a sound like a bone cracking, and the garage door, manual, the old kind, groaned and resisted, and then finally rolled up with a long, protesting scrape of metal against metal. The smell hit him first. Old smoke. Not fresh, not recent. Old smoke. The kind that had soaked into every surface years ago and never fully left. It was the smell of something that had burned hot and fast and been sealed away while it was still cooling. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim. It was a Ferrari. Or what was left of one. It sat low on 4 flat tires in the center of the bay, and it was, by any normal standard, a disaster. The hood was buckled and warped along the left side. The windshield was gone completely, the frame around it cracked and pulled outward. The paint, what was left of it, had gone black and blistered along the entire left flank, from the front quarter panel all the way back to the rear wheel arch. The interior was gutted, the seats reduced to wire frames, the dashboard a melted ruin of plastic and metal. The headliner was gone. The steering wheel was scorched down to the metal core. The estate woman said, "The lot starts at $2,000, but we've been authorized to negotiate." Jace crouched down next to the driver's side door, what remained of it, and looked at the rocker panel. He looked at the shape of the fender. He looked at the way the rear haunches flared out, a particular specific flare that didn't belong to any production Ferrari he'd ever seen in person. He stood up slowly. "I'll give you $800, he said. The estate woman didn't even argue. The flatbed cost him $300 to rent, and the better part of a day to load the Ferrari without doing any more damage to it than it had already suffered. By the time he got back to the shop, Holloway Restoration, a converted auto body facility on a dead-end street in the Millbrook district that he'd been running for 9 years, it was past 7 in the evening. His neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Puentes, who watched Cora on days Jace couldn't arrange anything else, had kept his daughter until 6:30 and then brought her over to the shop when 6:30 came and went. Cora was sitting on the rolling stool behind the parts desk with her shoes off, eating a granola bar and reading a book about horses, when the flatbed backed up to the shop's main door. She came to the window and looked at the burned car getting lowered to the ground on the truck's ramps. "What happened to it?" she said. "Fire." "A bad one?" "Yeah." Jace guided the truck driver with hand signals, watching the Ferrari's ruined frame come down slow and level. "A bad one." Cora watched it for a minute. "It's really ugly, Dad." "I know. Are you going to fix it?" "That's the plan." She looked at him the way she sometimes did, with her mother's eyes, calm and measuring, taking him apart to see what was really in there. Nadia had looked at him like that the first time they met, at a bonfire at a mutual friend's house 15 years ago, and he'd never once gotten used to it. Now the look came from a child with paint on her fingers and a granola bar in her hand, and it still had the same effect, made him feel like whatever he was thinking was already known. "How much did you pay for it?" she said. $800. "Mrs. Puentes says you spend money like you're allergic to saving it." "Mrs. Puentes knows a lot of things." Cora finished her granola bar and folded the wrapper into a precise square. "It better be worth it." "I think it might be," Jace said. "I really think it might be." He didn't sleep that night. He told himself he was just going to take a preliminary look, check the chassis numbers, see what he was working with, get a baseline. That kind of assessment usually took an hour, maybe 90 minutes if the car was complicated. The Ferrari took him until 2:15 in the morning. He worked by the shop's overhead fluorescents with a flashlight for the tight spaces, working methodically from the front of the car to the back, from the frame rails up through the body structure. He photographed everything. He took measurements. He pulled what wiring he could access and looked at what the fire had done to it and what the fire hadn't reached. The fire damage was concentrated almost entirely along the driver's side, front to back, heaviest at the front. Whatever had burned from the outside in, which meant the fire source had been external. The interior damage, the scorched seats, the ruined dash, came from radiant heat and smoke, not from the car itself igniting. The engine compartment was damaged, but not destroyed. The rear of the car was in surprisingly decent shape. Jace sat on an overturned milk crate in the middle of the shop at midnight and looked at the car and thought about what that meant. Something had burned next to this car, close and hot enough to damage the whole left side, and whoever had been driving it, or whoever had been near it, had experienced something bad. He went back to work. The chassis plate was in the engine compartment, mostly sheltered from the worst of the heat. He photographed it and typed the number into his laptop. The first 3 searches came back with nothing. The 4th search, a deep dive database maintained by a Ferrari historian in Turin that Jace had paid a subscription fee to access for exactly this kind of situation, came back with something. He read it. Read it again. Set the laptop down on the workbench and looked at the ceiling. Then he picked the laptop back up and read it a 3rd time. The number matched a commission record from 1987. A custom-built Ferrari Testarossa variant, one of exactly 3 vehicles built to a private specification by the factory for a single client. Not a standard production car, not a limited edition. A genuine one-off commission, the kind that Ferrari had done for an extremely short list of very wealthy, very specific customers during a particular period in the company's history. Of the 3 cars built to that specification, 2 had documented histories. They'd been sold at major auctions in the 90s, changed hands several times, ended up in collections in Europe and Japan. Their values were well established, their paperwork immaculate. The 3rd car, commission number ending in the sequence that matched the plate in Jace's shop, had no documented auction history, no known sales record. In the database notes, a researcher had flagged it years ago with a single line: whereabouts unknown, presumed lost. Jace sat in his shop at 2 in the morning and looked at the burned-out wreck sitting on his floor. Presumed lost. He thought about the $800 he'd handed a woman with a clipboard. He thought about the $17,000 in his bank account, his daughter's school fees, the business loan payment due in 6 weeks. He pressed both hands flat on the workbench and breathed carefully through his nose. "Okay," he said to nobody. "Okay." He didn't tell anyone about the chassis number for a while. Not Marisol, not his friend Devlin, who ran a fabrication shop 2 blocks over and was his closest friend in the business. Not even his accountant, who was already nervous about the year's margins. He just started working. The shop had 3 other projects on the floor: a '69 Camaro for a client in Dallas, a vintage Land Rover that had been sitting half-finished for 4 months, and a Porsche 911 that was almost done. Jace kept those moving forward, kept his 2 employees, Marcus, the body man, and a kid named Trevor who handled logistics and prep, on their regular tasks, and started spending every available hour on the Ferrari. He didn't tell Marcus and Trevor what he suspected. He told them only that the Ferrari was a personal project, that he'd bought it himself, and that it was going to be slow work done carefully. Marcus, who had been in the shop for 6 years and had seen Jace bring back worse, just nodded and asked no questions. Trevor asked where he'd gotten a burned Ferrari. Jace said at an estate sale. Trevor said cool and went back to sanding primer. The work in those first weeks was almost entirely investigative. Jace wasn't ready to put tools to metal yet. He needed to understand the car completely before he touched anything he couldn't undo. He documented every panel, every weld, every mechanical component, cataloging the damage and what lay beneath it. He ordered the factory build records through a contact he had in Italy, a woman named Francesca who dealt in Ferrari provenance and had bailed him out of confusing histories before. She charged a significant fee and said it would take several weeks. In the meantime, he started on the mechanical components. The engine, a flat 12, the type that should have been in the car based on the commission record, was present and largely intact, which was close to a miracle. The fire hadn't reached it in any meaningful way. The problem was everything attached to it: wiring harnesses, fuel lines, cooling hoses, accessory brackets, all of it compromised to varying degrees. Jay started pulling components methodically, labeling each one, assessing what could be restored and what would need to be sourced. Sourcing parts for a one-off commission was going to be a special kind of nightmare. He knew that going in. What he hadn't anticipated was how much the work would start to feel like something other than a restoration project. It felt like archaeology. Every hour he spent on the car, he found things. A fragment of leather from the original upholstery tucked in a crevice where the fire hadn't touched it. A distinctive burgundy color, hand-stitched. A piece of trim from the center console, intact beneath the melted plastic above it, showing the original design intent. Small things, fragments, but each one told him something about what this car had been before the fire, about the choices someone had made when they commissioned it. Someone had cared deeply about this car. Someone had thought hard about every detail of it. He wondered about that person, the original owner, the one who had commissioned 3 custom Ferraris in 1987, and whether they'd known what they'd had. But the first time Aurora Sterling's name came up in connection with the car, Jace wasn't looking for her. He was trying to trace the ownership history. Not for any particular reason, just because it was part of the process, part of understanding the full story of any vehicle he worked on. He contacted the estate management company and asked about the previous owners of the property. The woman he spoke to was helpful enough, pulling records, and she mentioned that the property had been in the Sterling family for decades. that the original owner had been a man named Harold Sterling, that he had died 18 months ago, and that the estate had passed to his daughter. Aurora Sterling, Jace said, because the name was in the news enough that even he, who didn't follow business news closely, had heard it. That's right, the estate woman said. She asked us to clear the property as efficiently as possible. She wasn't involved in the sale details. Did she have any information about the car? The Ferrari? A pause. I don't believe she was asked. I can check if she provided any provenance documents. She checked. She hadn't. Jace thanked her and hung up. He thought about what that meant. Aurora Sterling, heir to the Sterling Group, a private equity firm that had made the Forbes list for 3 consecutive years, had inherited a house full of her late father's things and asked an estate company to clear it as efficiently as possible. She'd sold a one-of-a-kind Ferrari for $800 without asking a single question about it. Either she didn't know what it was, possible, or she didn't care. Or, Jace thought, she had a reason not to want to think about it. He filed that thought away and went back to work. The build records came from Italy 6 weeks into the project. Francesca sent them as scanned documents with a cover email that said simply, "I think you know what you have. Please be careful." Jace read the records at the kitchen table after Cora was asleep. It was a Tuesday night in October, and rain was hitting the kitchen window in irregular gusts, and the house was very quiet. The records confirmed everything the database had suggested, and then some. The 3-car commission had been placed by a man named Harold E. Sterling in June of 1987. The specification had been unusually detailed. Harold Sterling had known exactly what he wanted, had worked closely with the factory on every element of the build, had signed off on multiple iterations of the design before the cars went into production. The commission had taken 14 months to complete. The 3 cars had been delivered in August and September of 1988. 2 of the cars had been designated as investments, as assets to be held and eventually sold. The third, the one sitting in Jace's shop, had been designated in the commission notes as personal use, to be retained. Harold Sterling had commissioned this particular Ferrari for himself to drive. Jace sat with that for a while. Then he turned the page. There was a delivery note at the back of the record file, handwritten in Italian, that Francesca had added a translation for. The note was from a factory representative who had accompanied the car to the United States for delivery, and it documented a conversation with Harold Sterling at the time. The translation read, "Mr. Sterling expressed that this vehicle represented a new chapter. He was specific that this car was not a financial instrument. He said he intended to drive it for the rest of his life." Jace closed the folder. He sat in his kitchen with rain on the windows and thought about a man who had commissioned a one-of-a-kind car because he intended to drive it for the rest of his life, and who had instead put it in a garage and left it there for decades, and who had died 18 months ago without ever explaining why. The conversation with Cora happened on a Saturday morning in November, 3 months into the project. Jace had been in the shop since 6:30. Cora came in at 9 with a brown paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over. She'd started making that walk alone 6 months ago, a fact that still occasionally woke Jace up at night. She was 8, and the bakery was 2 blocks, and he knew it was fine, and it still woke him up sometimes. She put the bag on the workbench and climbed up on her stool and looked at the Ferrari. Significant progress had been made by that point. The damaged panels had been removed, the frame had been cleaned and assessed, and the damaged sections marked for repair. The engine had been fully pulled and was on a stand in the corner. The car looked even worse in some ways, more exposed, more skeletal. But Jace could see its shape clearly now, the bones of what it was. "It looks like a skeleton," Cora said. "Kind of, yeah. Will it look like a car again?" "It'll look better than it did new." She thought about that. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Do you know whose it was? Before?" Jace looked up from the section of rocker panel he'd been cleaning. "Guy named Harold Sterling. He died a while back, and his family just sold it." "His daughter did." Cora was quiet for a moment. She was pulling a croissant apart into pieces, which was how she ate them, and not looking at him. That meant she was thinking something she wasn't sure she wanted to say. "What?" he said. "Nothing." "Cora." "I just think it's sad," she said. "If it was his car and he really loved it, and then she just sold it without even—" She stopped. Never mind, it's not my business. You don't know that she didn't care about it. Do you? Jace didn't answer that. I'm just saying, Cora said. If it was your car and you died and I sold it for $800, you'd probably be pretty annoyed. I'd be dead. I wouldn't know. You'd know, she said with complete confidence. He looked at his daughter, this child who was 8 years old and already walked alone to bakeries and had opinions about the emotional lives of dead strangers, and felt the thing he always felt when she talked like that. Some combination of love and grief and a specific kind of awe that had no name he'd ever found. Yeah, he said. I'd know. It was Cora who found it. That was the part that Jace would never quite get over, later. Not that it existed, not what was inside it, but that it was his daughter's hands that found it, on a rainy Saturday afternoon in December when she'd been hanging around the shop because there was nothing else to do, and he'd let her sit in the Ferrari's gutted shell because she liked doing that sometimes. Sitting inside things that were being rebuilt, she'd told him once, because it felt like being part of the thing. She'd been in there for maybe 20 minutes, quiet the way she got when she was really inside her own head, and Jace had been at the workbench with the wiring diagrams when he heard her say, "Dad, there's something back here." Back where? Behind where the seat was. There's like a... He heard her knocking on something. It sounds hollow. Jace came over and crouched next to the door opening. Cora was in the back, her feet on the transmission tunnel, her hands on the area behind the passenger seat. The seat was long gone, removed in the disassembly, and the area behind it was mostly bare metal and insulation backing, partially scorched. "Show me," he said. She knocked again. The sound was clearly different, a hollow resonance underneath the remaining insulation. Jace reached in and pressed along the panel with his fingertips, feeling the seam, feeling where the metal changed. He found the edge of a panel that wasn't structural. Something fitted into a recess in the body, covered over with insulation that had been glued in place. It took him 20 minutes with careful hands and the right tools to remove it without damage. Behind it was a compartment. Small, maybe 8 inches by 12, 4 inches deep. Built into the body structure at the factory, invisible from the outside, sealed against the back of the seat. Inside the compartment, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected it from everything the years and the fire had tried to do to it, was an envelope. The envelope was sealed. On the front, in a handwriting that was careful and deliberate and a little formal, were 4 words. For Aurora. I'm sorry. Jace sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long time. Cora behind him said quietly, "Are you going to open it?" "No," he said. "Why not?" "It's not mine to open." She thought about that. "What are you going to do with it?" Jace looked at the envelope. He looked at the 4 words on the front. He thought about a man who had commissioned his favorite car in 1987 and driven it into a fire and never explained why, who had lived for decades with that unexplained thing between himself and his daughter, who had hidden a letter inside the car and never found the right moment or the right words to tell her to look. "I'm going to find out who Aurora Sterling is," Jace said, "and figure out how to give this to her. She might not want it. I know. People don't always want the truth." He looked at his daughter again, 8 years old with oilcloth dust on her fingers and his late wife's measuring eyes. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," she said mildly. "You just started listening." He wrapped the envelope carefully in a clean shop rag and put it in the safe in his office. Then he and Cora went to get dinner, and he let her order the waffles, even though it was technically too late in the day for waffles. And they sat across from each other at the diner on 5th, and he looked at her face and thought about Harold Sterling and the letter sealed in oilcloth and the 40-word sentence on its front. For Aurora. I'm sorry. He thought about what that sentence cost a man to write, what it cost a man to hide, what it must have cost him to die without delivering it. And he thought about the 8-year-old girl who had found it with her hands in the dark, knocking on metal, listening for the hollow sound. The work continued through the winter. December, January, February. The other projects in the shop came and went. The Camaro finished in December and shipped to Dallas, a new project coming in, a vintage Mercedes that took 2 weeks and paid well. Jace kept the Ferrari moving forward in the spaces between, slower now because the work was getting more precise, because they were into the body repair phase, and the body repair was not the kind of thing that allowed for hurrying. Marcus did most of the body work, and he was good, the best Jace had worked with. But the Ferrari required discussion at every step because there was no template, no reference car he could go look at for comparison. Everything had to come from the documentation, from the build records, from photographs, from the measurements Jace had taken in those first weeks. They were rebuilding something that had never been documented in the way a production car would be, which meant they were making educated judgments constantly, and every judgment had to be right. Devlin came by the shop one evening in January, the way he did sometimes, and stood looking at the Ferrari for a while before he said anything. "That's not a production car," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." "What is it?" "Custom commission, 37 years old." Devlin walked around the car slowly, hands in his jacket pockets. He was 53, heavy-set, with the particular eye that 30 years of fabrication work gave a person. He missed nothing. "One of one?" he said. "One of three. The other two have documented histories." Devlin stopped. "This one doesn't." "It does now." Devlin looked at him. "Jace, what did you pay for this?" $800. The silence was significant. "You're not going to tell me where it came from or how you found it," Devlin said. "Estate sale." "And whoever sold it to you didn't know." Devlin nodded slowly. He kept looking at the car. "How long until it's done?" 6 more months? Maybe 7? And then what?" Jace said, "I'm still working that out." That was the truth. He was still working it out. The letter sat in the safe in his office, and he thought about it every day. And he thought about Aurora Sterling, and he thought about what he owed her, and what she might owe herself, and whether those two things were connected. He didn't have an answer yet. He just kept working, because the work was what he knew, and because the car deserved to be finished, and because somewhere in the logic of what he was doing, taking the most broken thing he'd ever found and bringing it back, he believed the rest of it would become clear. The Ferrari, piece by piece, began to look like itself again, and in the safe in the back of the shop, the letter waited. The letter stayed in the safe through March. Jace told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He told himself he needed to understand more about Aurora Sterling before he reached out, needed to know who he was dealing with, what kind of person she was, whether she was the type who would receive something like this with grace or the type who would call a lawyer. Both responses were understandable. Neither one made the reaching out easier. What he was really doing, and he knew it, was stalling. He'd looked her up, of course. It was hard not to. Aurora Sterling had the kind of public presence that made looking her up feel almost involuntary, like she was simply part of the information landscape whether you'd sought her out or not. The Sterling Group had been in the financial news consistently for the past 2 years, primarily because Aurora had taken the firm's chairmanship following Harold Sterling's death and had moved fast, restructuring 2 divisions, exiting 3 underperforming investment positions, and acquiring a mid-sized logistics company in a deal that financial press had called either brilliant or reckless, depending on which publication you read. The photographs told him less than he'd hoped and more than he wanted. She was 30 years old in the photos, dark-haired, composed in the way of people who had learned early that composed was the only acceptable presentation to the world. There was one photo from a charity gala, black dress, the particular practiced smile of someone who had attended 1,000 events like this and knew exactly how much of herself to offer to a camera, and one from a shareholder meeting where she was mid-sentence, one hand raised, and her face had something in it that was harder to name. Not anger, something underneath anger, something that had been there a long time. He closed the browser and went back to the shop. Devlin asked him, one afternoon in late March while they were eating sandwiches on the loading dock, whether he'd figured out the Aurora Sterling situation yet. "Not yet," Jace said. "You know she sold you something worth a significant amount of money." "I know." "So there's a question about what you owe her." "There's more than one question," Jace said. "That's the problem." Devlin ate his sandwich. He was good at not pushing, one of the qualities Jace valued most in him, and he just waited, chewing, looking out at the alley. "There's a letter," Jace said, "from her father. We found it in a hidden compartment in the car." Devlin put his sandwich down. It was sealed, Jay said. Still is. I haven't opened it. It says her name on the front. And you've had it since December. Devlin looked at him for a long moment. Jace? I know. That's not your letter to sit on. I'm aware of that. So why are you sitting on it? Jace looked out at the alley. There was a sparrow doing something complicated in a puddle near the dumpster. He watched it for a moment. Because once I give it to her, she's involved. And once she's involved, I don't know what comes after that. Maybe she decides the car should come back to her. Maybe she tries to, I don't know, make a claim. Would she have a legal claim? I don't know. The sale was legitimate. She signed the paperwork. But she's a billionaire with lawyers and I'm a guy in a shop in Millbrook. He paused. And the letter is her father's. That part isn't complicated. That part, I know. So you're scared? A little, yeah. Devlin picked his sandwich back up. Well, he said, at least you know it. DDE. He called Francesca in Italy in April, partly to update her on the restoration's progress, and partly because she was the one person outside his immediate life who knew the full picture of what the car was. She was pleased about the progress. He sent her photographs and she went quiet for a moment and then said, in her careful English, that it was looking like she expected it would look, which was exceptional. I need some advice, he said. About the car? About its history, the ownership. He told her about the letter. She was silent for longer than felt comfortable. You need to give it to her, Francesca said. I know that. The question isn't whether. The question is how. She paused. And whether you tell her about the car before or after. I've been thinking about that. If you tell her about the car first, what it is, what it's worth, then everything after that is colored by money. She'll wonder what you want. She'll be defensive. It will be very difficult for her to receive anything else from you cleanly. And if I tell her about the letter first, then the money is secondary. She comes to the car through her father, not through the valuation. A pause. That is a more honest sequence. More honest, Jace said. Also more complicated. Yes, but I think you already knew that. He had. He thanked her and hung up and sat at his desk for a while, and then he took the letter out of the safe and put it in his jacket pocket and went home. He drafted the email 6 times before he sent it. The first 3 drafts were too formal. They read like legal correspondence, which was exactly the register that would put Aurora Sterling on the defensive immediately. The 4th draft was too casual, which felt wrong in the other direction. The 5th draft was better, but too long, packed with explanation and context and preemptive justification that all added up to a man trying to control the conversation before it started. The 6th draft was 3 sentences. Ms. Sterling, my name is Jace Holloway. I purchased a vehicle from your father's estate in August, and during the restoration I found something that belongs to you. I'd like to return it. If you're willing to meet, I can come to you. He sent it on a Wednesday evening from the kitchen table after Cora was asleep, and then immediately felt the particular anxiety of a thing said that couldn't be unsaid, a door opened that couldn't be closed. The response came 4 days later, on a Sunday morning. He was in the shop when his phone buzzed. Mr. Holloway, I don't know what you're referring to. My father's estate was handled by a management company, and I wasn't closely involved in the details. What did you find? Jace wrote back, a sealed letter addressed to you, in your father's handwriting. I think it was meant for you to have. I'd rather not send it by mail. Another wait. Shorter this time, 2 hours. I'm in the city Tuesday afternoon. I can be free by 3. He wrote back with the shop's address and told her parking was on the street. Then he put his phone down and went back to work, because there was nothing to do now but wait, and the work was better than waiting. Oh, she was punctual. He gave her that. He heard a car pull up out front at 3:02 and looked through the shop's front window and saw a black sedan. Not ostentatious, not the kind of car that announced itself, which surprised him a little, and watched Aurora Sterling get out. She was taller than the photographs suggested. She was wearing dark pants and a jacket that was either expensive or a very good imitation of expensive, and she walked toward the shop's door with the particular stride of someone who was used to walking into rooms that were unfamiliar and finding them manageable. She was looking at the building's exterior with an expression that wasn't quite readable from the window. Assessing, maybe. Deciding what kind of place this was. Jace met her at the door. She was younger looking in person than in the photographs, which was strange because the photographs had made her look young. Up close, she had the kind of face that carried its history visibly. Not in lines or age, she was only 30, but in something around the eyes, something that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. "Mr. Holloway," she said. "Jace, please." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She came in and looked around the shop with the same assessing expression. The Ferrari was partially covered. He'd put a cloth over the main body because it wasn't finished, and he didn't want the first thing she saw to be the car in an incomplete state. She looked at the cloth and then looked away from it, at the workbench, at the tools, at the other project on the floor. A 71 Datsun that Marcus was halfway through a full mechanical restoration on. "You restore cars," she said. "That's right." "Old ones." "Mostly. Some vintage, some collector pieces." He gestured toward the small office. "Can I get you something? Coffee?" "No, thank you." She looked at him directly. "You said you found something." He went to the office and got the letter from the desk drawer where he'd moved it from the safe that morning. He came back out and held it out to her. She took it. She looked at the front of the envelope, the 4 words in her father's handwriting, and something happened in her face. It was brief and immediately controlled, but it was real. A flinch, small and deep, the kind that came from somewhere older than conscious thought. "Where did you find this?" she said. Not a question, more like a statement she needed to say to make it real. Hidden compartment in the car, behind the rear seat area. It was wrapped in oilcloth, but that's why it's in good condition. She looked at the envelope for another moment. "You didn't open it." "It's not mine." She turned it over. The back was sealed with the original wax. A plain seal, no crest, nothing decorative. Old wax. She ran her thumb along the edge of it. "When did you find it?" "December. My daughter found it, actually. She likes to sit in the shells while I'm working." He paused. "She's 8. Aurora looked up at him briefly, then back at the envelope. "And you've had it since December." "Yes." "That's 4 months." "I know. I was trying to figure out the right way to get it to you." He stopped, because that sounded like an excuse even if it was also true. "I should have contacted you sooner." She didn't confirm or deny that. She just stood there holding the envelope, and Jace could see her working through something, whatever she was working through, in a private way that didn't invite comment. He stood back and let her. After a while, she said, "The car you bought, was it the Ferrari?" "Yes." "My father's Ferrari." She said it flatly, without inflection. "I sold it because I didn't want anything to do with it." Jay said nothing. "That car was—" She stopped, started again. "My father had a complicated relationship with that car. He bought it before I was born. It was important to him. He talked about it the way some people talk about the one that got away. Like it was the great thing from before everything else, before my mother left, before the business got serious." She paused again. "Before me, I suppose." "I'm sorry," Jay said. "It burned when I was 9. He was in the garage and there was a fire. A neighbor's propane tank, something like that. I was never clear on the details because my father never talked about it clearly. The fire damaged the car badly. He had it put away and he never fixed it and he never talked about it and he never got rid of it. For 22 years it just sat in that garage." She looked at the envelope. "I always thought he was grieving the car," she said. "I thought he cared more about fixing the car than he cared about other things. About us. About me." Her voice was level, controlled, but there was a quality underneath the level that Jace recognized. He'd used that quality himself for years after Nadia died. The way you talked about something hard from a safe distance while also being completely inside it. So when he died, and the estate needed to be cleared, I told them to sell it. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want it in a museum somewhere with his name on a plaque. I just wanted it gone." She finally looked up from the envelope and looked at him. And you bought it for $800. Yes. And you've been restoring it. He wasn't sure whether he should tell her yet. He thought about Francesca's advice. Let the letter come first, let the money be secondary, and decided to stay with what was immediate. I've been working on it, yes. She looked at the covered shape across the shop. May I see it? It's not finished. It's about halfway. I don't need it to be finished. He walked over and pulled the cover back. She went still. It wasn't the car she'd sold, or it was underneath. The same car, the same bones. But the work that had been done in 8 months had pulled it back from ruin far enough that its shape was finally legible again. The buckled hood had been replaced, the chassis straightened, the fire-damaged panels removed, and beginning to be replaced with new metal shaped to the original specification. The paint was still primer in most places, but the primer was smooth and the lines of the car were clean again. The distinctive flare of the rear haunches restored to something close to their original form. Aurora stood in front of it for a long time. He drove it into a burning garage door, Jace said. That's what the fire pattern tells me. The damage is concentrated on the left front, the way it would be if the car hit something solid while something outside it was burning. He drove it through whatever was on fire to get out. She turned and looked at him. I can't be certain, he said, but the evidence is consistent with that. He wasn't in the garage when the fire started. He drove into it and drove out through whatever was burning at the exit. The silence in the shop was the kind that has weight. Outside, a delivery truck went past on the street, and then the quiet came back. That's not what I thought, Aurora said. Her voice had changed. Something had gone out of the level control of it. Not broken, but loosened. For 22 years, I thought he was in the garage trying to save the car. He was probably saving himself, Jace said, using whatever vehicle was available. She looked at the letter in her hand. She turned it over once and then back. Her jaw was set in a way that said she was thinking about crying and had decided against it, at least for now, at least here. I should go, she said. Okay. I need to read this somewhere else. I understand. She moved toward the door and then stopped. She turned back. The car. What are you planning to do with it? Jace said, I haven't decided completely. I'd like to see it finished first. She nodded once, slowly. She looked at the Ferrari one more time. Then she looked at him, and he saw it again. That thing underneath the composure. The old thing. Something that had been sitting in her for 22 years the same way the letter had been sitting in the car. It doesn't look like junk, she said. No, it doesn't. She left. He heard the car start outside and pull away, and then it was quiet again, and the Ferrari sat in the middle of the shop in its primer coat with its hidden compartment empty now for the first time in decades. Jay stood there for a moment. Then he went to the workbench and picked up his tools and went back to work. Mud. She called 3 days later. He was putting Cora to bed. They were in the middle of a chapter book about a girl who discovers she can talk to birds, which Cora had chosen specifically, she claimed, because she thought birds probably had a lot to say. And his phone lit up on the nightstand with an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. Later in the kitchen, he listened to the message. Her voice on voicemail was different from her voice in the shop. In the shop, she'd been managing herself carefully. On the voicemail, she sounded tired in the specific way of someone who hadn't slept. Mr. Holloway, Jace, I read the letter. A pause. I don't know how to explain what's in it without explaining a lot of context that you don't have and that I don't particularly want to give to a voicemail. But I want you to know I read it. And I think I owe you something. Not money, or not only money. I'm not sure what the word is. I'll call you again when I've figured out what I'm trying to say. She hung up. Jace listened to the message twice. Then he made himself a cup of tea he didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the dark window. He thought about what she'd said. I think I owe you something. It was an honest thing to say and an incomplete one. He'd heard it and felt the shape of what she wasn't saying, that the letter had moved something, that the thing she'd believed for 22 years had shifted, and that she didn't yet know what to do with a belief that had shifted. He knew that feeling. He'd lived in it for a long time after Nadia died. The way the world rearranges itself around a new truth, and nothing in it is quite where you left it. She called again 5 days after the voicemail. He answered this time. I wanted to explain something, she said without preamble. The letter, my father wrote it the year after the fire, when I was 10. He said he'd tried to tell me what happened, but that every time he started the conversation, I shut it down. He said he decided to write it down instead, and then she stopped. He never found the right time to give it to me, so he put it somewhere safe. In the car, Jace said. In the car. A pause. Which I then sold for $800 31 years later. You didn't know? No, I didn't know. Her voice had a dry quality on it, a dark humor that he hadn't heard in person. The letter says what you said, about the fire, about driving through it. He was in the garage. He'd gone out to check on something. He heard the tank blow. The door was already on fire when he got to it. He used the Ferrari because it was right there and it was the fastest thing available, and he didn't think about anything except getting out. Jay said, he was trying to survive. He was trying to survive. She repeated the words carefully. And then he spent 22 years letting me believe he'd chosen a car over his family because he didn't know how to say, I was terrified, and I used the first tool I had, and I'm sorry it cost us something. The line was quiet for a moment. He apologizes in the letter, she said, not for the fire, for the silence, for letting the silence become the story. Jace held the phone against his ear and looked at the kitchen wall and thought about all the silences he'd let become stories, his own. The ones around Nadia's death, around the years before it, around the way grief makes you hold things tight because you're afraid that letting them out means letting them go. I'm sorry, he said, for the 22 years. Don't be sorry for something that isn't yours, she said. It came out sharper than she probably meant it, and then she said, more quietly, sorry, it's fine. I'm not very good at people being sympathetic. It's a known problem. I'll try to be less sympathetic, he said. A pause, and then something that might have been a short, reluctant laugh. That would be helpful. He told her then, because the moment was right, because the money question had to come eventually, and he'd rather it came from him now than from her later when she'd had more time to feel like he'd been withholding it. What the car was. What the chassis record said. What Francesca had confirmed. She was quiet for a long time. Say that again, she said. He said it again. Another long silence. When she spoke, her voice was very careful. You paid $800. Yes. My father commissioned one of the rarest Ferraris in existence, put it in a garage, and I sold it to you for $800. The estate management company negotiated down from $2,000. I offered $800. Of course you did, she exhaled. What's it worth? I don't know with certainty until it's authenticated and finished. My best estimate, based on comparable commissions that have sold. He stopped, then said it. 8 figures. Could be more depending on the condition of the final restoration and the provenance documentation. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. I see, she said finally. I should have told you sooner. Yes, you should have. I wanted you to have the letter first, before the money was in it. She was quiet again, then, she seemed to be searching for the word. That was actually thoughtful, in a maddening way. I know. I need some time to think about what this means. Take whatever time you need. She said she would, and hung up. And Jace sat in his kitchen and looked at the dark window again and thought that things were now in motion in a way they hadn't been before. The kind of motion that goes in directions you can't fully predict. The kind that asks you to stay steady while everything around you accelerates. He went to check on Cora, who was asleep with the bird book open on her chest. He took the book carefully and put it on the nightstand and stood there in the dark for a moment listening to his daughter breathe. Whatever came next, this part was solid. This part he knew how to protect. He went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a while and then, eventually, slept. Aurora didn't call for 2 weeks after that last conversation. Jace didn't reach out either. He wasn't sure what the right interval was. Whether silence meant she was processing, or whether it meant she'd handed the situation off to lawyers and was building a case for something. He didn't know her well enough to read the silence. He just kept working, kept the Ferrari moving forward, kept the rest of the shop running the way it always had, and tried not to spend too much mental energy on a situation he couldn't control. Devlin asked him once, in passing, whether the Sterling woman had been back in touch. "Not yet," Jace said. "You told her the number." "Yeah." And she just went quiet. "People do that when you tell them a car they sold for $800 is worth 8 figures, Jace said. "They need a minute." Devlin considered that. "Or they're calling lawyers." "I know." "You're not worried?" "I'm worried," Jace said. "I'm just not doing anything about it." Devlin nodded like that was either admirable or stupid, and possibly both. He went back to his sandwich. The call came on a Thursday morning. Jace was in the pit under the Datsun when his phone buzzed on the floor above him, and he had to slide out to get it, which meant he was lying half under a car with grease on his hands when he answered. "It's Aurora Sterling." "I know," he said. "Your name came up." A beat. "I want to come see the car again, if that's all right." He said it was, and they agreed on Saturday. He hung up and slid back under the Datsun and lay there for a moment looking up at the undercarriage, thinking about what Saturday meant. Not a lawyer call. A personal visit. That was something. She came alone again, same black sedan parked in the same spot out front. This time she looked different walking up to the door. Less armored, maybe. Or a different kind of armored. The kind that came from a decision made rather than a position defended. She'd made some kind of decision in the 2 weeks of silence, and he could see it in the way she walked. Marcus and Trevor were both in that day, working on opposite ends of the shop, and they both clocked Aurora when she came in the way people clock someone with that particular quality. Not beautiful exactly, not striking exactly, but present in a way that takes up its full square footage. Marcus went back to what he was doing immediately. Trevor took a moment longer. Jace met her near the door and walked her back to the Ferrari, which was further along than the last time she'd seen it. Another 6 weeks of work had gone into it since her April visit. The passenger side was now largely complete. New panels shaped and fitted, primer smooth, the lines of the original design clear and confident. The driver's side still showed the stages of the work, the bare metal and the shaped replacements being fitted carefully, but the overall shape of the car was now unmistakably itself. Aurora stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "What was the original color?" "Rosso Corsa, factory red. I confirmed it from the build records." "I thought Ferraris were red." "Not always. This one was commissioned red specifically. The client requested it." "My father." She said it without the distance she'd used in April, like the word had changed meaning on her since then. "Your father," Jace agreed. She walked around the car slowly, the way Devlin had months ago, with that same quality of serious attention. She looked at things up close, crouched down to look at the rocker panel repair, stood back to look at the hood line. She wasn't performing interest. She was actually looking. "You match the original," she said, straightening up from the rocker panel. "As close as I can get. The build records were detailed, and I had a contact in Italy verify the spec. You went to a lot of trouble." "It's the job." She looked at him. "It's more than the job." He didn't argue that. It was more than the job. It had been more than the job since 2 a.m. on the first night when he'd sat on a milk crate and looked at the chassis number and understood what he was dealing with. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said, "about what the car is worth." "I figured. I want to be clear that I'm not going to try to claim it back." She said it directly, looking at him. "The sale was legal. You paid what was asked. Whatever it's worth now is yours." She paused. "I'm also not going to pretend I don't feel strange about it." "You'd be weird if you didn't feel strange about it." "My father bought this car the year he married my mother," she said. "I didn't know that until I read the letter. He bought it as, I think the word he used was a promise to himself, that no matter how serious everything got, he was going to keep something just for the pleasure of it." She stopped. Then the fire happened, and the marriage ended, and the pleasure of things kind of stopped being available to him. She said it matter-of-factly, but it wasn't a matter of fact. It was a window, and she'd opened it carefully, and Jace stayed where he was and didn't move toward it. He says in the letter that he kept the car because getting rid of it felt like admitting the promise was broken. But he couldn't fix it because fixing it meant looking at it, and looking at it meant— She shook her head slightly. He wasn't a man who was good at looking at his own damage. Most people aren't. No. She looked at the car. I thought for years that the car was his excuse to not be present, that every hour he spent in that garage, which was a lot of hours, was an hour he chose something else over his family, over me. She was quiet for a moment. He wasn't fixing it, though. He was just sitting with it. I didn't know that. Jace said, "What did the letter ask, if you don't mind me asking?" It asked me to forgive him for being bad at explaining himself. She said it with a short, dry quality that wasn't quite cynicism, more like the particular humor of someone standing next to something painful. 22 years of silence, and what he wanted was to be understood. Not excused, just understood. And? She looked at him. "I'm working on it." A pause. "I'm not a fast processor." "That's all right." "Is it?" She asked it like a real question. "Because I'm 30 years old and I've been angry at a dead man for most of my life, and now I find out I was wrong about the main thing. That's—" She stopped, started over. "That's a significant structural problem." Jace had been standing with his arms folded loosely, and he dropped them now and put his hands in his pockets. "You weren't wrong about being angry. You were angry because he was absent. The reason for the absence was different than you thought, but the absence was real." She looked at him for a moment, assessing. "You sound like you've had this conversation before." "Not this exact one, but adjacent." "Adjacent," he said. "Yeah." She didn't push it, which he appreciated. She turned back to the car and they stood quietly for a moment, and it wasn't an uncomfortable quiet. It was the kind that came from two people who were both used to being alone with their thoughts and didn't need to fill every silence with noise. Trevor appeared from the back of the shop carrying a box of parts and glanced at them and then glanced away with the studied unobtrusiveness of someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Noticing. "Your employee is very subtly staring at me," Aurora said, not looking up from the Ferrari. "He's 23, Jace said. "He'll manage." Something that was close to a real smile crossed her face. It changed how she looked. Younger, less like a press photograph of herself. "Tell me about the restoration," she said. "What's left?" So he told her. He walked her through the remaining work, the driver's side body panels, the engine rebuild, the interior, the paint. He explained the sourcing challenges, the decisions he'd made about what to restore versus what to replace, the ongoing conversation with his contact in Italy about period-correct materials. She listened carefully and asked good questions. Not the questions of someone performing interest, but the questions of someone who was actually tracking the logic. Halfway through, she said, "You said the engine is original." "Mostly. The block survived. Some ancillary components needed replacement, but they're sourced from the period." "How did the engine survive the fire?" "Lucky placement. The fire came from the driver's side front. The engine compartment took smoke and heat, but not direct flame in the main area. The compartment is pretty well sealed on these." He paused. "Your father also drove it out quickly. The less time it sat in the heat, the better the chances for the mechanicals." She nodded slowly. "He was a good driver. I remember that about him, actually. He was very deliberate behind the wheel, smooth. My mother used to say he drove the way he thought, which she meant as a compliment." "That's a good way to drive." "Yes." She looked at the engine bay, which was covered now with a fitted cloth. When you drove it, before the fire got to it?" She stopped. "I don't know why I'm asking that. He's been gone for 18 months. It doesn't change anything." "I don't think that's the kind of question where the answer changes anything," Jace said. "I think it's the kind where you just want to know." She looked at him. "He drove it until the fire," Jace said. "The wear patterns on the components tell me it was driven. Not a lot, but regularly. He wasn't just sitting in it in the garage, he was taking it out." Aurora was quiet for a moment. "Where?" "I can't tell you that," just that the mileage is consistent with regular short drives over a period of years before the fire. Not highway miles, local. He watched her work through what that meant. A man driving alone on local roads in a car he'd bought as a promise to himself, keeping the promise in small increments, keeping it private because he didn't know how to make it public without explaining the whole complicated story of why the car mattered. "Okay," she said quietly. Just that. "Okay. Botan." She came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. There was no explicit agreement about this. She just appeared each Saturday around 10 in the morning, and Jace would put on another pot of coffee and they would look at the week's progress, and she would ask questions. It became a pattern before either of them named it as one, which was probably the only way it could have happened. If either of them had tried to formalize it, they would have found reasons to resist it. The conversations moved beyond the car gradually. Not into personal territory exactly, neither of them was built for that kind of rapid disclosure, but into the territory around the personal, the edges of things. She told him once, while he was fitting a new section of trim and she was sitting on a stool with her coffee, that she'd started reading about Ferrari history. Not because she cared about cars particularly, she clarified, but because she wanted to understand what her father had been drawn to. "And?" Jace said, not looking up from the trim. "They're not just cars," she said. "That's a thing I didn't understand before. The way people talk about them, the specific ones, the significant ones, it's not really about transportation. No, it's about craft. Someone's vision of what a thing should be, and then someone else's decision to value that vision enough to take care of it." Jace looked up at her. "I'm not being profound," she said, slightly defensive. "I'm just saying what I read." "I know what you're saying," he said, "and you're right." She looked at him with that measuring quality, deciding whether he was patronizing her. She apparently decided he wasn't. "My father understood that, and I never knew. I thought it was just an expensive hobby. Most people from outside it do." I was dismissive about things I didn't understand," she said. "I do that." She said it plainly, like reading a fact from a report. It's a known issue. Most people are dismissive about things they don't understand. I do it more than most people. He went back to the trim. "Yeah, probably." She made a sound that was partly offended and partly amused. That was very direct. "You said it was a known issue. I was agreeing. You're supposed to be diplomatic. You just told me you don't like people being sympathetic. Diplomatic is adjacent to sympathetic." A pause. "That's actually fair." She drank her coffee. "You're strange, Jace Holloway. People have said that. Do they mean it as a compliment? Depends on the person." She was quiet for a moment, and he kept working, and the shop made its shop sounds. The ventilation fan, the faint noise from the street, the occasional clank from Marcus at the far end. Then she said, "My father was strange too." In the same general way. He had opinions about things, and he just stated them, without all the careful packaging most people use. I used to find it embarrassing. She paused. "I think I find it less embarrassing now." Jace said nothing, because there was nothing to add to that. In May, Francesca flew in from Italy. Jace hadn't asked her to come. She'd called and said she wanted to see the car in person, and that she was going to be in New York for other business, and could detour. He'd said yes because Francesca's eye was worth having, and because there were decisions coming up about the final stages of the restoration that he wanted her perspective on. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, small and precise, and dressed in the way of Italian women of a certain profession. Elegantly practical, everything functional, but nothing accidental. She was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair cut short, and she walked into the shop and looked at the Ferrari the way a doctor looks at a patient she's been tracking by report and has finally gotten in front of. She walked around it 3 times without speaking. Jace stood back and let her. Finally, she said in Italian, "Madonna." Then in English, "Jace, this is exceptional work." "It's not done." I know it's not done. The work you've completed is exceptional." She was looking at the passenger side, at the panel work. "These seams." Marcus did the bodywork. "Where's Marcus?" "I'll introduce you." He was obscurely pleased, in the way of someone whose work is being evaluated by someone who knows what they're looking at. Francesca spent 2 hours in the shop. She looked at every accessible component of the Ferrari with the systematic attention she brought to everything, photographing as she went, asking questions about Jace's decisions, taking notes in a small book she carried. She spoke to Marcus for 20 minutes about the bodywork, and Marcus, who was not easily impressed, looked slightly dazed afterward. At the end of the 2 hours, she sat with Jace in the office and told him what she thought. "The authentication will be straightforward," she said. "The chassis number, the build records, the provenance documentation, it's clean. Cleaner than I expected for a car that's been out of circulation this long. Whoever owned it last was not careless with it. Harold Sterling." "Sterling." She nodded. "He kept the documentation?" "I found records in the house. The estate company had boxed them without knowing what they were." He'd sorted through the boxes 3 months ago, old folders of papers that the management company had labeled miscellaneous, not knowing that miscellaneous included the original purchase documentation, the factory correspondence, the spec sheets in Harold Sterling's handwriting. "Good," Francesca said. "That documentation is significant for the value." "How significant?" She looked at him over her reading glasses. "At auction, with full provenance, a car of this specification in this condition of restoration." She named a range. Jace put both hands flat on the desk. "That's the conservative end," Francesca said. "The upper end depends on who wants it and how much they want it. For the right collector, this is a once-in-a-career acquisition." The number was more than he'd estimated. Meaningfully more. "There will be interest from the auction houses," Francesca said. "When word gets out, and word will get out, these things always surface. There will be significant interest." "I haven't decided how to handle the sale," Jace said. Francesca looked at him. "The daughter. Aurora Sterling. She knows about the car. She knows the general range of value." "And what does she want?" "She hasn't said. He paused. "We've been talking. She comes by on Saturdays." Francesca's expression didn't change, but something in it shifted. A small, knowing quality that made Jace feel like he was being read accurately in a way he hadn't authorized. "I see," she said. "It's not—" he started. "I didn't say anything," Francesca said. "I know, you were thinking it. I'm Italian. We think loudly." She closed her notebook. "My advice, as your professional contact, finish the car first. Don't make decisions about the sale until the work is complete and the authentication is in hand. Whatever other factors are involved, the car deserves to be finished before it becomes a transaction." "Agreed," he said. "And Jace?" She looked at him steadily. "Whatever the daughter's situation is, her feelings about the car, her history with her father, those are real things. But they are separate from the value of what you've done here. You found this car. You saw what it was. You spent 9 months of your life bringing it back. That is not nothing." "I know. Make sure you still know that when the number gets larger and other people start having opinions." He said he would. She left the next morning and he went back to work, and the number she'd named sat in the back of his head like a sound that was too loud to ignore and too complicated to simply accept. He told Aurora about Francesca's visit the following Saturday. She came in at 10 with 2 coffees from the good place 2 streets over. She'd started doing that sometime in May, without announcing she was going to, just arriving with coffee. And Jace told her about the authentication assessment and the revised value estimate while she stood with both hands around her cup. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. "That's—" She stopped. "That's significantly more than I had in my head. It's the provenance documentation. I found your father's original purchase records in the estate boxes." "The estate company had them." "In a miscellaneous box, yes." She looked up at the ceiling for a moment. A complicated expression moved across her face. Not anger, something more like the vertigo of a person being shown the full scale of a thing they'd been standing next to without measuring. "I made a lot of quick decisions about my father's estate," she said. "I wanted it handled. I didn't want to be involved in the details. I know. I missed things." "You missed this one," he said. "You didn't miss it out of carelessness. You missed it because you were in pain, and pain makes people want to clear things out. She looked at him. You're doing the sympathetic thing again. I'm doing the accurate thing. Sympathy is incidental. A short silence. Then, my lawyers have looked at the sale documents, just so you know. I had them look before I came back the second time. I figured. It's legal, clean. You paid what was asked, the paperwork is correct. She held his eyes. I'm not telling you that because I'm threatening anything. I'm telling you because I don't want there to be a version of this where you didn't know I'd checked. He appreciated that more than he could easily say. Thank you for telling me. I'm not always... She looked for the word. I don't always tell people the things they should know. I'm working on that. He thought about her father, who hadn't been good at that either. He didn't say it. The car will be done in about 2 months, he said instead. I've been thinking about what happens after. And? I want to talk through it with you, before I decide anything. He paused. Your name is part of this car's story, whether you want it to be or not. Your father's story is. I think you should be in the conversation about what happens to it. She studied him for a moment. There was something careful and a little suspicious in it, the look of someone who'd been offered things that came with undisclosed conditions, often enough to check for them automatically. What do you want from that conversation? She said. I don't want anything specific. I want to make the right decision about the car. He paused. And I think the right decision is more complicated than just selling it to whoever offers the most money. Most people would think the money was the right decision. Most people aren't me. She stood with her coffee cup and looked at the Ferrari, which was close now, closer than it had ever been. The driver's side panels fitted and smooth, the color starting to come through in the first pass of red that Marcus had laid down on a test section near the rear wheel arch. The red was exactly right. He'd looked at factory samples and mixed it 3 times before Marcus got close enough, and then they'd refined it twice more. It was the red Harold Sterling had chosen in 1987, looked at under the same fluorescent lights, now 37 years later. Aurora looked at that small section of red for a long time. He would have loved to see it like this, she said. Whatever he felt about the car, whatever complicated thing it was, he would have loved this. Her voice when she said it was quiet and contained, the way voices got when a person was holding something carefully. Jace looked at the red panel and thought about a man who'd driven alone on local roads, keeping a small promise to himself in the early mornings when nobody was watching, and he thought it was probably true. Yeah, he said. I think he would have. She finished her coffee. She stayed another hour, watching Marcus work, asking questions about the final stages. She was getting good at the questions, more specific, more technical, showing the reading she'd been doing. Marcus answered her with the professional respect he gave anyone who asked real questions, and Jace watched the two of them talk about the engine rebuild with a feeling that was hard to categorize. When she left, she said, 2 months. Give or take. She nodded. Okay. She looked at the car one more time. Finish it. We'll figure out the rest after. He said he would. She walked out to the sedan and drove away, and the shop went back to its regular sounds, and Jace went back to work. The first coat of red on that rear quarter panel caught the afternoon light coming through the high windows, and glowed the way the best reds do. Not flashy, not screaming, just deeply, assuredly itself. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to, just looking at it. Then he picked up his tools. The last 2 months were the hardest. Not in the way the early work had been hard. The grinding detective work of the disassembly, the sourcing problems, the decisions made in the dark with no reference point. The last 2 months were hard in the way that finishing things is always hard. The margin for error had collapsed to almost nothing. The stakes of every decision were fully visible now, and the end was close enough that Jace could feel the weight of it in a way he hadn't been able to when the finish line was still abstract. Marcus felt it too. He got quieter in those final weeks, more deliberate, taking longer on details he would have moved through faster on any other car. He didn't explain this, and Jace didn't ask him to. They both understood what the car had become in the 14 months since it had rolled off a flatbed onto the shop floor. It wasn't a project anymore. It was something they were responsible for in a way that went past the professional. Trevor, who was 23 and still mostly operating in the register of things being cool or not cool, told Jace one afternoon that the Ferrari was the best thing the shop had ever done. Probably, Jace said. Definitely, Trevor said, with the certainty of someone who hadn't lived long enough to second-guess himself. You should put photos all over the website. This is the thing that makes people call you. Finish prepping that hood and then worry about the website. Trevor went back to the hood, but Jace heard him mutter something under his breath that had the word legendary in it, and he didn't correct him. The paint was the thing that occupied most of June. Marcus had laid down the base coats in late May. That particular red Rosso Corsa, the one they'd mixed 3 times before they got it right, and the color had been correct in a way that felt almost too good to be true, like the car had been waiting for it. The clear coats went on in careful stages over 2 weeks, each one cured fully before the next. The temperature and humidity in the shop controlled as tightly as they could manage it. Between coats, Jace would stand in the shop alone in the early morning before anyone else arrived and look at the developing depth of the color in the low light. It was, he thought, the kind of red that made you understand why Harold Sterling had specified it. Not loud, not trying to be noticed from across a room, just completely, confidently itself. The engine went back in during the 3rd week of June, which was a 2-day process that Jace handled personally with Marcus assisting. The Flat 12 was a complex unit, and the reinstallation required precision at every stage, the kind of work that didn't allow your mind to wander, which was part of why Jace had looked forward to it. The mechanical work was always clarifying. You were either right or wrong. The tolerances either met or they didn't, and the engine either ran cleanly or it told you immediately where the problem was. No ambiguity. The engine started on the 3rd attempt. It didn't run well at first. There was a stumble in the idle, a hesitation off the bottom that told him the fuel system needed adjustment, which he'd expected. But the fundamental sound of it, the particular texture of a Flat 12 coming to life after decades of silence, was something that moved through the shop floor and into Jace's chest and stayed there. Marcus stood with his arms folded and his head tilted slightly, listening. "Yeah," he said. That was all. Trevor said, "Oh man," repeated it. "Oh man." Jace let it idle until the temperature came up, listening, making notes. Then he shut it down and went back to the fuel system. Devlin came by on a Wednesday evening at the end of June, uninvited but not unexpected. He had a sense for when things were happening at Holloway Restoration that Jace had long since stopped trying to explain. He came through the side door and stood looking at the Ferrari for a full minute before he said a word. The car was nearly complete. The paint was done, the interior was in, the glass had been reinstalled the previous week. The restoration wasn't cosmetic in the way of a car that had been made to look good from a distance. It was the kind of work that invited close inspection, because the closer you looked, the better it got. The gaps were correct. The surfaces were honest. Every restored element was in conversation with every original element that had survived. "Jace," Devlin said. "Yeah. This is..." He stopped. He walked around the front of the car and crouched to look at the headlight treatment and stood back up and looked at the overall shape. "This is the best thing I've ever seen come out of a shop. Any shop." Marcus did most of the body. "You know what I mean." Jace knew what he meant. The bodywork was Marcus's. The engine was Jace's. The decisions, every decision about what to preserve and what to replace, and how to handle the 100 moments where the right answer wasn't obvious. Those had been Jace's. The whole thing was his, in the way that a piece of work is yours, not because you did every physical task, but because you held the vision of it in your head every day for over a year, and refused to let it become something less than what it should be. "The exhibition," Devlin said. "You're still doing it?" "Invitation came in 2 weeks ago. I confirmed last week." The Meridian Collector Exhibition was held every September at a convention venue in the city, one of the most significant gatherings of collector automobiles on the East Coast. Jace had been approached by the event's curator in late May, after Francesca had quietly let it be known in certain circles that a significant discovery was nearing completion. He'd hesitated and then agreed because the exhibition was the right context for what the car needed. Serious people, people who understood what they were looking at, people whose reaction to the car would be informed by knowledge rather than just aesthetics. "It'll cause a stir," Devlin said. "I know. The auction houses will be there. The serious collectors. Once they see it authenticated. I know, Jace said again. Devlin looked at him. You still don't know what you're going to do with it. I have some thoughts. Do those thoughts involve Aurora Sterling? Jace didn't answer right away. He looked at the car instead, at the red that held the light the way a good red always did, deep and without vanity. She's part of the story, he said. The car's story. Her father's story. You can't separate them. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. Devlin was quiet for a moment. She's been coming every Saturday for 3 months. She wants to see the progress. Okay. It's not... Jace stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't know how to finish it honestly, and Devlin was one of the 3 people in his life to whom dishonesty felt genuinely wrong. It's complicated, he said finally. She's got a lot going on internally. The letter, her father. She's in the middle of rethinking something she's believed for 20 years. And you're the person she's doing that rethinking with. I'm the person who happened to be holding the information that started it. Right, Devlin said. That's very clinical. Dev, I'm just observing. He looked at the car again. Whatever it is, I hope you're being straight with yourself about it. That's all. Jace was quiet for a moment. She's not... He paused. She's not looking for anything from me. She's looking for her father. I'm just the person who found his car. People can look for more than one thing at once, Devlin said. Even people who don't think they are. He left shortly after. Jace stood in the empty shop with the Ferrari and thought about what Devlin had said, and then he stopped thinking about it because there was still work to do, and the work was what he could control. Aurora came that Saturday as she always did, with 2 coffees, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw the car. Complete. All the way complete for the first time. Sitting on new tires with the stance it had been built with, the red fully cured and the interior showing through the glass, new leather in the original burgundy, the same color as that fragment he'd found in the first weeks, the same hand-stitched quality sourced from a craftsman in Florence that Francesca had connected him with. She stood in the doorway for a while. Jace stayed at the workbench and let her have the moment. She walked in slowly. She set the coffees down on the near bench without looking away from the car and walked toward it, and she stopped about 4 feet from the front and just looked. It's red, she said. Rosso Corsa. Original spec. She was quiet. Your father chose it, Jace said. It's in the commission notes. He went back and forth on the color. The factory offered him several options for a custom commission. He chose this one specifically. He liked red, she said. I forgot that. She paused. He had a red coat when I was little. I thought it was embarrassing. He wore it everywhere. Jace said nothing. Could be very... His tastes were specific, strong. He knew what he liked, and he didn't apologize for it. She was still looking at the car. I always found that irritating, and then I grew up and I'm the same way, and... She stopped, made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Genetics is undefeated. She walked around to the driver's side and looked in through the window at the interior. She looked at the dash, at the steering wheel. She looked at the small details, the instrument cluster, the door pulls. Then she stepped back and looked at the whole car again from the side. My father sat in this, she said. He drove it. Yes. On local roads, you said. Early mornings, you think? That's what the wear patterns suggest. He drove it at 6 in the morning on local roads so nobody would know. She said it without bitterness exactly. More like she was turning a thing over and looking at all its sides. He was embarrassed that he still loved it. Jace thought about that. Or he just wanted it to be his, he said. Some things don't need an audience. She looked at him across the roof of the car. Is that what this was for you? 14 months. Some of it. The rest of it? He picked up his coffee from the bench. The rest of it was... I don't know how to say this without sounding strange. Say it anyway. The car deserved it, he said, whatever that means. It deserved to be finished. It deserved to be seen as what it actually is. He paused. Some things get thrown away before anyone finds out what they are. This one got lucky. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. You really believe that, she said, that objects deserve things. I believe the work people put into them deserves something. Your father's work, the factory's work. The craftsman in 1988 who built this specific car for a specific person. He shrugged. That work shouldn't just disappear. She looked down at the roof of the car, at the red paint, and he watched her turn something over in her head. I want to talk about what comes next, she said. Okay. The exhibition is in 6 weeks. 5.5. The authentication is complete? Francesca filed the full provenance report last week. It's clean. Aurora nodded. She moved to the front of the car and sat on the edge of the nearby workbench. Not the Ferrari, the workbench, with the natural ease of someone who'd spent enough Saturdays in the shop that it no longer felt foreign. So after the exhibition, the auction houses come. Probably before the exhibition is over, Jace said. Word will move fast once it's on the floor. And you'll sell it. That's the obvious path, he said. She looked at him. But not the path you're on. He drank his coffee. I've been thinking about something else. Tell me. So he told her. He'd been turning it over for weeks since sometime in late May when the shape of it had started forming in the back of his head, and he'd tested it against Devlin's reaction and against his own sense of what felt right and against the thing Cora had said months ago about it being sad that someone sold a car without looking at what was inside it. There was a museum, the Kellerman Automotive Museum, about 40 minutes north of the city, that was one of the best institutions of its kind in the country. Serious, well-funded, focused on vehicles with significant historical or cultural stories. Jace had a relationship with their director, a woman named Patricia Soule, going back several years. He'd consulted on a restoration they'd managed, had advised on a few acquisitions. He'd called Patricia in late May. Hypothetically, he'd said. Not committing to anything, hypothetically. Patricia had said, also hypothetically, that a car of this significance, not just the mechanical and design rarity, but the complete story, the provenance, the discovery, the restoration, the letter, would be one of the most significant acquisitions in the museum's history. She used the word permanent, Jace said. Permanent installation. The car, the provenance documentation, the hidden compartment preserved, the letter. A complete exhibit. Aurora was very still. Your father's name, Jace said. On the exhibit, his story, not the business legacy, the personal story, the commission, what the car meant, what happened to it and how it came back. She didn't say anything for a long moment. He watched her face and tried not to read it too hard. You'd be giving up, she started. The auction value. Yes. That's a significant amount of money. I know what it is. Jace? She said his name with a particular weight. You have a daughter and a small business, and I'm aware of my financial situation. I'm not trying to... She stopped, took a breath. I'm trying to make sure you've actually thought this through and you're not doing something. She searched for the word. Noble, without thinking about the real consequences. I've thought about it for 2 months. Patricia Soule's museum. That's a legitimate institution. One of the best. And she would accept a donation. She'd have to take it through the board, Jace said. But she was clear that the answer would be yes, for something like this. He paused. The shop would get credit as the restoration studio. That has value too, career value. Long term, not nothing. She was looking at him steadily. Is that why you're considering it? The career value? No, he said. That's part of the picture. It's not the reason. Then what's the reason? He looked at the car. He thought about everything he knew about Harold Sterling that Harold Sterling had never managed to say out loud. The promise he'd made to himself, the drives in the early morning, the letter sealed in oilcloth in the dark for decades. He thought about Cora's hands finding the hollow place in the metal, the particular sound of knocking on something empty. The car has a story, he said, a real one. Not just what it is mechanically or what it's worth at auction. If I sell it to a private collector, that story goes into a garage somewhere and the door closes. Nobody knows it happened. He paused. The museum keeps the door open. Aurora looked at the car for a long time. I'd want the letter included, she said. Her voice was careful. If this happens, the letter stays with the car. I assumed. A copy for the exhibit. The original. She stopped. The original I keep. Of course. She pressed her lips together for a moment. And my father's story. The real one. Not the version where he was the eccentric rich man with the car obsession. The real one. The fire. What he was doing. Why the car mattered. That's the story the exhibit would tell. The whole thing. She looked at him. There was something in her face that was hard to look at directly. Not because it was ugly, but because it was unguarded in a way her face usually wasn't. And Jace had learned in the months of Saturdays that her unguarded moments were private things she didn't distribute widely. He never got to explain himself, she said. Not in his lifetime. Not to me. She paused. If the museum tells his story correctly, if it shows that he wasn't, she stopped again. If it shows what he actually was, it will, Jace said. You don't know that for certain. No, but Patricia Soul is good at this, and you'd have input on the exhibit content. I'd make that a condition. She looked at him sharply. You'd do that. I'd insist on it. She turned and looked at the car again, and the silence in the shop was the particular silence of something being decided. Jace could feel it, the way a decision has a physical quality when it's being made, a shift in the air around the person making it. I want to meet Patricia Soul, Aurora said, before anything is agreed. I'll set it up. And Jace, she turned back to him, I want to do something for you, not the museum donation. That's your decision about your asset, and I'm not going to put a price on it, but I want... She paused. There's a young mechanics program, trade school foundation. I've been considering funding it as part of the Sterling Group's charitable work. She looked at him directly. I'd like your input on how it should be structured, your expertise, because I don't know anything about what a young person needs to learn this work. He looked at her for a moment. That's a real offer. I don't make offers I don't mean. He thought about Trevor, who'd called the car legendary and meant it with his whole chest. He thought about what it had meant to him at 22, to have an older mechanic spend time explaining something without making him feel like an idiot for not already knowing it. Okay, he said. Yeah, I'll help with that. She nodded. Something in the set of her shoulders changed. A small release, a fraction of the held tension going out of her. She picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and looked at it and put it down again. The exhibition, she said. Will you tell me what to expect? So he did. He walked her through the Meridian event, the format, the type of collectors who attended, what the floor would look like, how the authentication would be presented. She listened with her arms folded and her chin slightly up, the way she did when she was absorbing information she'd decided to take seriously. Halfway through, she said, Will you be there the whole time at the exhibition? It's my car on the floor, yes. I'd like to be there too. A beat, if that's appropriate. It's your father's car, Jay said. It's appropriate. She nodded again. She looked at the Ferrari one more time, the full length of it, front to back, the red that her father had chosen. And whatever she was feeling when she looked at it now was different from what had been in her face the first time she'd seen it in the shop. That time there'd been shock, vertigo, the particular pain of being confronted with something you'd dismissed. Now it was something else, something quieter. She picked up her bag from the bench. I owe you something I don't have a word for, she said. You don't owe me anything. I know you think that. You're wrong, but I know you think it. She looked at him directly. My father's letter was in that car for 31 years. It could have stayed there. It could have burned properly the first time or gone to a scrapyard or sat in some collector's private storage forever. She paused. You found it, and you gave it to me before you knew what the car was worth. Cora found it, Jay said. Your daughter found it in your shop because you bought a burned car for $800 because you saw something everyone else had missed. She held his eyes. That's yours. That doesn't transfer to Cora. He held the eye contact for a moment. She's going to be annoyed that you said that. She likes the credit. The unguarded look again. That thing that changed her face. She sounds like she's going to be formidable. She already is, Jace said. It's a problem. Aurora almost smiled. Not quite. Close. She walked toward the door and then turned one more time, a habit she'd developed. This backward glance, like she was making sure the car was still there before she left. "I'll see you next Saturday," she said. "I'll be here." She left. The sedan pulled away from the curb. The shop went quiet. Jace stood alone with the finished Ferrari and looked at the red under the fluorescence and thought about a lot of things. About what he was giving up and what that meant and whether he was at peace with it. He'd asked himself the question enough times by now that the answer had settled. It wasn't easy and it wasn't simple, but it was settled, and settled was enough. He thought about what Aurora had said, about the letter sitting in the car for 31 years. He thought about Harold Sterling's handwriting on the envelope, careful, deliberate, a little formal. 4 words. For Aurora. "I'm sorry." 31 years for a letter to travel 20 feet. He picked up his tools and did a last check of the engine bay. Things a man checks not because he expects to find a problem, but because the car deserves to be checked. And then he covered the Ferrari with the cloth he used now, the good one, the one without any grease stains, and he turned off the lights and locked the shop and went home to his daughter. The Meridian Collector exhibition opened on a Saturday in September, and Jace arrived 2 hours before the doors did. He came with Marcus and Trevor, and they moved the Ferrari off the transport with the kind of care that had no specific name. Not quite reverence, not quite anxiety, something in between that comes from spending 14 months of your life on a thing and then having to trust other people's floors and lighting and air quality with it. The exhibition venue was a converted industrial hall on the waterfront, high ceilings and concrete floors, and the kind of light that serious collectors and their curators had spent money getting right. Jace had been here before, twice, with other cars. It felt different this time. The car was positioned near the center of the hall, in a space the curator had designated for featured vehicles, the ones the exhibition considered significant enough to anchor the room. When they rolled it into position and the transport crew stepped back, and Jace saw the Ferrari under the exhibition lights for the first time, he stood very still for a moment. 14 months of work. Every decision, every sourced component, every hour Marcus had spent shaping metal, and every hour Jace had spent rebuilding that engine, and every argument with himself at 2 a.m. about whether this choice or that choice was right. It was all in the car, invisible, the way the best work always is. You couldn't see the 14 months. You could only see the car. And the car was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. Marcus came to stand next to him. He didn't say anything. He just looked at it with his arms folded and his expression neutral in the way it got when he was feeling something he wasn't going to discuss. "You good?" Jace said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I'm good." Trevor was less restrained. He'd been quiet the whole drive over, which was unusual enough that Jace had checked his rearview mirror twice to make sure the kid was still conscious, and now he walked around the car slowly and then just stopped and looked at it with the particular expression of a young person confronting something that has reorganized their sense of what's possible. "I worked on this," Trevor said. "Not to anyone specifically, just saying it." "You prepped about 40 components," Marcus said. "I worked on this," Trevor said again, like he was making a note in a permanent file. Jace almost laughed. He went to sort out the authentication display instead, the provenance documentation Francesca had assembled, the build records, the chassis history, all of it mounted and arranged in a presentation board that would stand beside the car. He'd worked with a designer on the layout, wanting it to be serious without being inaccessible. The story of the car, told clearly, what it was, where it had come from, what had happened to it, what had brought it back. The hidden compartment was addressed in the display, photographed in its open state, the dimensions noted, the context explained. The letter was referenced but not reproduced. A sealed letter was discovered within the compartment, addressed by the original owner to a family member. The letter has been returned to the owner's family, that was all it said. Enough to complete the story without violating the part of it that belonged to Aurora alone. He was adjusting the display when he heard the side door open behind him and turned and saw her. She was early, which surprised him. She'd told him she would come when the exhibition opened, not before, that she needed to come in with people around her because she thought walking into an empty hall to look at her dead father's car would be more than she was ready to manage alone. But here she was, 40 minutes before opening, in a dark blue dress that was simple and clearly chosen with care, her hair down in a way he hadn't seen before. She looked at the car from across the empty hall and went still. Jace walked over. He stopped a few feet away, leaving her space. "I thought you were coming at opening," he said. "I changed my mind." She didn't look at him. She was looking at the Ferrari. "I decided I wanted to see it before everyone else, before it belonged to a room full of people." She paused. Before it stopped being just his. Jace said nothing. She walked forward slowly. Her heels made a specific sound on the concrete floor. Steady, deliberate, each step considered. She stopped in front of the car, close enough to touch it, and she didn't touch it. She just looked. Up close, in the exhibition light, the red was everything it was supposed to be. Not a performance of red. Not the aggressive, attention-demanding red of something that needs to be noticed. It was the red of something that knows exactly what it is and doesn't need to prove it. Harold Sterling had known what he was choosing in 1987, and the 37 years between that choice and this moment hadn't changed the rightness of it. "He would have been overwhelmed," Aurora said quietly. "He wasn't good with being seen, with his things being seen. He kept everything private." She paused. "I used to think that was selfishness. I understand now it was closer to shyness. He was shy about the things that mattered to him." "That's a hard thing to carry alone," Jace said. "He carried a lot alone." She reached out and almost touched the hood. Her hand stopped just short of the surface, and then she dropped it back to her side. "The museum, Patricia's team, they've been very good about how they're framing his story." "I know. Patricia showed me the draft exhibit text last week." "She got it right." Aurora turned to look at the provenance display, reading the text she'd already read in draft form, seeing it now in its final presentation. The part about the commission, about what he said to the factory representative. She stopped at that section. "This vehicle represents a new chapter. He was 34 years old when he said that." She was quiet for a moment. "He was the same age I am now." Jace let that sit. There were things you couldn't respond to usefully. Things that needed air around them, not commentary. She turned back to the car. "You're giving this up," she said. "I want to say that out loud here, so it doesn't go unsaid. We talked about this. I know we talked about it. I want to say it anyway." She looked at him. "You found something that most people wouldn't have seen. You spent 14 months bringing it back, and you're giving it to a museum because you think that's the right thing for the story." She held his eyes. "That's not a small thing, Jace. I don't want you to minimize it." "I'm not minimizing it." "Sometimes you do. Minimize things you've done." He looked at her. "Is this a known issue?" Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "Recently observed." He picked up his coffee cup from the display table, so he'd brought one from the truck, lukewarm by now, and drank from it and looked at the car. "The money would have changed things," he said. "I'm not going to pretend it wouldn't. The shop, Cora's school, the loan, all of it would be different." He paused. "But I've been doing this work for 22 years, and I've never once had something that deserved more than the highest bidder. I don't think I could have lived with treating this like it deserved less." "Most people would have sold it," she said. "I know." The auction houses were very interested. After the authentication came out, she'd been there for 2 of those conversations. She'd come with him to meet a representative from one of the major houses at his request because he'd wanted her in the room. They weren't subtle about the interest. No, they weren't. "You didn't waver." "I wavered," he said. "I just didn't change my mind." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father would have liked you. He liked people who had opinions and kept them." She paused. "He would have argued with you constantly because that was how he engaged with people he respected, and you would have found it exhausting." "Sounds like someone else I know." She gave him a look that was partly offended and entirely aware that he was right. "I'm working on the arguing." "You're good at it. Don't work on it too hard." The doors opened at 9. The hall filled over the next hour with the particular crowd that the Meridian exhibition drew. Collectors and dealers and historians and the category of wealthy enthusiast who knew enough to be genuinely interested and had the resources to act on that interest. They came in their jackets and their careful shoes, and they moved through the exhibition with the practiced ease of people who attended these events regularly And when they reached the Ferrari, they stopped. Jace watched it happen. He'd positioned himself near the provenance display, close enough to answer questions, far enough back not to hover. He watched people approach the car and go still the way Aurora had gone still. The moment of registering that this wasn't a standard exhibition piece, that something here was different, that the quality of the work and the completeness of the story added up to something that didn't come along often. Francesca arrived at 9:30 and found him near the display. She looked at the car from a distance, then at him, then at the car again. "I've been doing this for 30 years, she said. "I can count on one hand the cars I've seen that stopped a room." "It's stopping a room," Jace said. "Yes." She didn't sound surprised. She sounded satisfied in the deep way of someone who had been right about something important. The Kellerman acquisition. Patricia confirmed it this morning. The board voted Thursday night. Unanimous. He'd known it was coming. Patricia had warned him. Still, hearing it confirmed made something settle in him that had been held in place by uncertainty for months. A long, slow exhale that wasn't visible, but was real. "Good," he said. "The donation terms are in order. The attribution is correct. Restoration, Holloway Restoration Studio." She touched his arm briefly, the Italian gesture of someone who means what they're about to say. "This will be the thing people know you for. Not just in this community, in the broader conversation about significant restorations. What you did here will be a reference point." He nodded. He thought about Trevor saying, "I worked on this" in the empty hall that morning. The particular tone of it, not bragging, just needing to say the fact out loud so it was real. He understood that now in a way he hadn't this morning. The auction house representative found him at 10:15. Jace had been expecting it, and it wasn't a long conversation. The man was professional about it, acknowledged the museum decision with the particular grace of someone who had lost a significant commission and wasn't going to be ungracious, and said only that if Jace ever had another significant discovery, he should call before he called anyone else. Jace said he would, and meant it, and they shook hands and the man moved on. Devlin appeared at 11 in his good jacket, looking slightly uncomfortable in the way he always did at events where his usual outfit of work clothes was not appropriate. He found Jace by the display and stood next to him and looked at the car and the crowd around it. "How many people have asked you about selling it today?" he said. 4. 5 if you count the auction house rep. "And you've said no to all of them." "Museum's already confirmed. It's not mine to sell anymore." Devlin nodded. He watched a couple, so older, clearly serious, clearly knowledgeable, make a slow circuit of the Ferrari, stopping to consult the provenance display, talking quietly to each other. The woman pointed at something on the passenger side panel, and the man leaned in to look and then straightened up and looked at the car with a new expression. "You know what I keep thinking about," Devlin said. "The $800. "Yeah." "You handed a woman $800 for a burned car without knowing what it was." "I had a feeling." "You always say that." "It's always true." Devlin was quiet for a moment. "What if you'd been wrong?" Jace looked at the car. "Then I'd have had an interesting project and an expensive lesson, same as half the things I've bought at estate sales." He paused. "But I wasn't wrong." "No," Devlin said. "You weren't." Cora arrived at 11:30. Jace had debated whether to bring her. She was 9, the exhibition was long, it was a weekend, and then had stopped debating because there was no version of this day that didn't include his daughter. She was the reason the compartment had been found. She was the reason the letter existed in anyone's hands. Whatever was happening today had a direct line back to a Saturday afternoon in December, when an 8-year-old had knocked on a piece of metal and listened to the hollow sound. She came in with Marisol, Jace's sister, who had insisted on accompanying her, and who arrived looking around the hall with the expression of someone trying to decide whether to be impressed. She was a practical woman, Marisol, and she managed her brother's occasional finds with a combination of love and exasperation that had been consistent for as long as either of them could remember. "The parking was impossible," Marisol announced by way of greeting. "I know. I'm sorry." "Your daughter told me we should have taken the train. She was correct. I don't want to hear about it." Cora beside her was already looking at the room. She was in her good dress, the green one she'd chosen herself at the beginning of the school year, and her hair was in a braid that had started the morning neat and was already coming loose on one side, the way her hair always did. She spotted the Ferrari across the room, and her face did the thing Jace had been waiting to see. The recognition of something she knew from before it was itself, the private knowledge of origin. She walked toward it without being told. Jace followed her. She stopped in front of the car the way she'd stopped in front of it the first time she'd climbed in the gutted shell. With complete attention, nothing held back. She looked at it for a long time. "It doesn't look like the same car," she said. "That's the point." "I know that's the point. I'm just saying, it really doesn't." She walked around to the driver's side and crouched down to look at the rocker panel. The same panel she'd seen as bare metal and filler and primer in 12 different stages, and which was now finished and red and smooth. She stood back up. "Dad?" "Yeah. It's really beautiful." He looked at his daughter looking at the car, and he felt something that didn't have a name. Not pride exactly, not happiness exactly, but something that was made of both of those things, and also something else. Something that had to do with continuity, with the sense that some things survive their own breaking and come out the other side as something you couldn't have predicted from the beginning. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Cora found Aurora about 20 minutes later, which was inevitable. Aurora had been working the room in the way she did, moving through the crowd with that particular quality of hers, present but self-contained, answering questions when approached, watching the reactions to the car with an expression that Jace had learned to read as a complex thing. Grief and satisfaction, and something that was probably closer to peace than she'd felt about anything connected to her father in a very long time. Cora walked up to her with the directness that was both her best and most alarming quality and said, "You're Aurora Sterling." Aurora looked down at her. "I am." "I'm Cora. I found the letter." A beat. "I know who you are," Aurora said. "Your father talks about you." Cora absorbed this. The letter was in a hollow part behind the seat. I could hear it was different when I knocked. "I know. He told me." "Are you glad I found it?" The question landed in the air between them and Jace, who was close enough to hear, felt himself hold his breath. Aurora looked at this 9-year-old who asked direct questions and apparently saw no reason not to, and something in her face went quiet and honest. "Yes," she said. "I'm very glad you found it." Cora nodded, satisfied. "I thought you would be. Some things need to be found before they can do anything." She looked at the Ferrari. "That's what my dad says about cars." "Your father says a lot of things worth saying." "He says that too," Cora said, without apparent irony. "I need to go find my aunt. She's lost." She pointed vaguely across the room. "It was nice to meet you." "It was nice to meet you, Cora." Cora went to find Marisol, navigating the crowd with the confidence of someone significantly larger than she was. Aurora watched her go, and when she turned back to Jace, the expression on her face was something he'd never seen from her before. Undisguised, unmanaged, the look of a person who has just been shown something simple and true and hasn't had time to compose themselves around it. "She's extraordinary," Aurora said. "She knows it. That's the concerning part. Don't make her less sure of herself." She said it with a directness that surprised him. "Whatever else, don't do that." "I wouldn't." "I know. I'm saying it anyway." She looked at the car. "I was sure of myself when I was 9, very sure. And then a lot of things happened that made me less sure, and I spent 20 years rebuilding that sureness out of things that weren't. The right materials. Business success, money, the appearance of having everything together." She paused. "Let her keep the original version." Jace looked at his daughter across the room, who had located Marisol and appeared to be lecturing her on something, gesturing at a car on the exhibition floor. "I'll try," he said. The afternoon wore on. The room stayed full, which the curator told Jace was unusual for this hour of the exhibition. People typically cycled through and left, but the Ferrari kept pulling people back, kept generating conversations, kept doing the thing that a car with a genuine story does when the story is told correctly. Jace answered questions until his voice was tired. He talked to collectors and historians and 2 journalists who had come specifically because word of the authentication had circulated in the right places. He talked to a young man, mid-20s, clearly mechanical background, who had come to the exhibition on a trade ticket and who stood in front of the Ferrari with the expression of someone seeing a possibility they hadn't previously considered. Jace talked to that young man for 20 minutes about restoration work, about what the career looked like, about what skills mattered, and which ones you could learn and which ones you had to be born with a version of. The young man's name was Daniel. He said he was working at a dealership currently, doing routine maintenance, and that he wanted more than that but didn't know how to get there. Jace gave him a card and said to call. He meant it. Aurora saw this exchange from across the room and didn't comment on it when she came back to stand with him, but she noted it in the way she noted things, quietly, adding it to the account she was keeping of who Jace Holloway actually was. The conversation about the mechanics program happened formally for the first time in late October, 6 weeks after the exhibition. Aurora had been building the structure of it since September. The Sterling Group's charitable foundation had the capacity to fund it. The question was what to fund and how. She came to the shop on a Tuesday, not a Saturday, which was new, with a folder of notes and her practical expression, and sat across the desk from Jace in his cluttered office and put the folder on the desk between them. "I want to build it around what actually produces good mechanics," she said, "not what sounds good in a brochure." "Those are sometimes different things," Jace agreed. "Tell me the difference." So he told her. He talked for an hour about what he'd learned and how he'd learned it, about the ratio of book knowledge to hands-on time that actually produced competence, about the specific things that formal training got right and the things it consistently missed, about mentorship and what made it work and what made it fail. She took notes in the direct, non-decorative handwriting she had, nothing fancy, just clear, and asked good questions and pushed back twice on things he said in ways that made him reconsider them and say so. She called in a curriculum consultant 2 weeks later and included Jace in the meeting, then a vocational school director, then a program coordinator who ran a similar initiative in another city. Each meeting built on the last, and each one Jace came away from with the sense that Aurora Sterling, when she decided to do something, did it with the same completeness she brought to everything. She didn't build things halfway. The program launched in January. 12 students, ages 16 to 19, selected through a combination of demonstrated interest and financial need. The shop hosted 2 of them for a rotation in February, a girl named Priya who had been rebuilding her own motorcycle since she was 15, and a boy named Marcus Jr., who was no relation to Jace's Marcus, but who had the same quality of instinctive mechanical intelligence that couldn't be taught, only directed. Marcus, the original, the one who'd done the bodywork, took Marcus Jr. under his supervision with the particular gruff efficiency of a craftsman who doesn't waste words but shows you everything. Jace watched this from across the shop and felt the specific satisfaction of something turning in the right direction. Priya asked better questions than most adult clients Jace had dealt with. He told her so. "My grandmother says that too," she said, without missing a beat, and went back to the carburetor she was disassembling. The Ferrari went to the Kellerman Automotive Museum in March, 8 months after the exhibition. It went in a climate-controlled transport with Jace following in his truck, the same way he'd followed any number of completed projects to their destinations. And it went to a space that Patricia Soule had prepared with the care of someone who understood the specific gravity of what she was receiving. The exhibit opened on a Thursday evening. Patricia had organized a small opening event, not a gala, not the kind of thing that required black ties and catered food, but a gathering of the people most directly connected to the car and its story. Jace and Cora and Marisol. Devlin, who stood in front of the finished exhibit display with his hands in his jacket pockets, and a look on his face that he would have denied if anyone had pointed it out. Marcus and Trevor, who had both come because Jace had asked, and because neither of them would have been anywhere else. Francesca had flown in again, the second transatlantic trip in under a year, which she claimed was unreasonable and which she had clearly been planning to make since September. Aurora came with 2 members of her foundation's board, and then separated from them almost immediately and was simply Aurora, moving through the small crowd with the particular ease she'd developed over months of Saturday mornings in a working shop where nobody treated her like anything except a person who asked good questions. The exhibit was exactly what Patricia had promised. The Ferrari sat at the center, visible from all angles, under lighting that showed the red correctly. Around it, the provenance documentation was mounted in panels. The build records, the commission notes, the photographs of the restoration in progress, the hidden compartment open and documented, the letter referenced with the careful, respectful text Jace had approved, and Harold Sterling's story, told plainly, without eulogy language, without the smoothing of difficult things into comfortable shapes. A man who loved a beautiful thing, a man who survived a fire using the tool he had available, a man who couldn't find the words for what had happened, and who lived for decades in the gap between what was true and what the people he loved had been allowed to know. Cora stood in front of the exhibit panel that described the compartment discovery and read it twice, carefully. Then she looked up at Jace. "They got it right," she said. "I know. My name's not in there. Your name is in the provenance documentation in the archive, not the public display." She considered this. "That's okay," she said. "I know I found it. That's enough." He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, in the green dress again, standing in a museum in front of a car she'd found the secret heart of when she was 8, and she was okay with knowing it privately. He thought about what Aurora had said. Let her keep the original version. He thought Cora was doing a pretty good job of keeping it herself. He found Aurora standing in front of the car alone at the end of the evening, when the small crowd had thinned and the museum's quiet had started to reassert itself. She was standing the way she'd stood the morning of the exhibition, in front, close but not touching, looking at the whole thing. He stood next to her. "It found its place," she said. "Yeah. My father would have argued about this. He would have said it should be private, that it was a personal thing, and putting it in a museum was making it public in a way he never wanted." She paused. "And then he would have come here alone on a Tuesday morning when nobody was around and looked at it for an hour." "How do you know that?" "Because that's what I did," she said. "I came here on a Tuesday 2 weeks ago, before the opening, just to see it in the space." She looked at the car. He was private about the things that mattered to him, but that doesn't mean he didn't want them to matter to anyone else. I think he just didn't know how to invite people in. Jay said, "You figured out how to invite people in." She looked at him sidelong. "The program. The students. And every Saturday morning for 6 months." A pause. Those were for me. Not exactly an act of openness." She looked back at the car. "I came because I needed to understand something. I needed to understand what my father had seen, why it mattered." She paused. "I think I understand now." "The car?" "Not just the car." She was quiet for a moment. He saw something worth saving in a thing most people had written off. And he committed to it completely, without knowing what it would cost or what it would come to. She stopped. He just believed the work was worth doing. Jace looked at the Ferrari. The red under the museum lights was the red Harold Sterling had chosen. The red Jace had mixed 3 times until it was right. The red that had glowed in the afternoon sun through the high shop windows on a day in June when everything was almost but not quite finished. It was the same red. It looked different in the museum than it had in the shop. Not worse, just different. More formally itself. "Can I ask you something?" Aurora said. "Yeah." "When you drove it, after the engine was rebuilt." She'd asked him about this once before, peripherally, and not pressed it. "What was it like?" He thought about the morning in late July when he'd taken the Ferrari out for the first time. Not far, just a few blocks on the quiet industrial street where the shop sat, in the early hours before traffic. He'd been alone. He'd told no one he was doing it because he'd wanted that to be a private thing, the particular private thing of a man finding out whether 14 months of work had added up to what he'd believed they would. It had. It had added up to exactly that. The engine had run the way he'd known it would. Not perfect. He'd needed 2 more adjustments afterward, but alive in a way that was unmistakable. A sound and a feel that communicated everything Harold Sterling had been paying for in 1987 when he'd specified this car, and no other. "Like something coming back from a long way away," Jace said. "Like something that had been held underwater and finally came up." Aurora was quiet. He felt that, Jace said. Whenever he drove it, whatever his complicated feelings were about the car, about the fire, about everything that had gotten complicated, when he was driving it, he was just driving it. That's what it feels like. She nodded slowly. Her hands were at her sides and she was looking at the car, and there was something in her face that Jace had never seen before, not in all the months of Saturdays. A kind of arrival. A person who has been traveling towards something for a long time and has finally stopped moving. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply, without qualification. "You already thanked me." "Not for that," she said. "For—" She paused, searching for the exact thing she meant. "For treating the car like it had a story worth telling, for not selling it to whoever offered the most money, for finding the compartment and not opening the letter." She paused again. "For driving it in the early morning before anyone was there, because he would have wanted someone to know what it felt like." There was nothing to say to that. He didn't try. They stood quietly in front of the Ferrari for a while, in the museum's evening light, and the red was exactly what it had been, and the car was exactly what it had always been, underneath the fire and the years and the silence. The thing Harold Sterling had commissioned at 34 years old as a promise to himself, as evidence that some part of his life was going to stay beautiful, regardless of what else complicated itself, and which had survived, and which was now in a place where the story could be told as many times as it needed to be told. Cora found them like that, standing in front of the car, not talking, and she came and stood between them with the confidence of a person who belongs exactly where she is. And she looked at the Ferrari the way she always looked at it, like she knew it personally, like it had a private history between them. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. If something gets damaged by fire and then someone fixes it, is it still the same thing?" He looked at her. It was almost the same question she'd asked once before, months ago, and he knew she remembered asking it. She was asking it again because she wanted to hear what the answer was now, after everything. He looked at the car. He thought about 14 months. He thought about Harold Sterling driving alone in the early mornings. He thought about a letter in oilcloth in the dark for 31 years. He thought about a woman standing quietly across the room at the exhibition, looking at the car her father had loved and learning for the first time what she'd spent 2 decades misunderstanding. He thought about what damage does to things, and what people do about damage, and whether the thing that comes back from restoration is the same thing or a different thing, or something that doesn't need to be categorized because the category is beside the point. "It's the same thing," he said, "just with more history in it." Cora thought about this. "More history makes it worth more?" "Sometimes," he said, "if someone takes the time to understand what the history is." She nodded slowly, the way she did when she was filing something away. "Okay." She looked at the car one more time. "It's really red," she said. "Your grandfather chose well," Aurora said quietly. Cora looked up at her. It was the first time either of them had used that word, grandfather, in this context, and it landed in the air between all three of them with a particular weight. Not heavy, not wrong, just real. "He had good taste," Cora said, with the matter-of-fact authority of someone announcing a fact she'd always known. Aurora made a sound that might have been a laugh, short and genuine, the kind that comes before you can decide whether to let it out. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then back at the car. "He did," she said. "He really did." Here's what Jace thought about later, driving home that night with Cora asleep in the back seat, and the city going past the windows in its usual way, the lights moving across the glass in patterns he'd watched all his life. That value is a strange and unreliable thing, that most people move through the world with a fairly fixed idea of what something is worth, and that idea is usually correct because most things are worth approximately what they appear to be worth. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's efficient, it's practical, it keeps the world moving. But occasionally something comes along that isn't what it appears to be. That's been damaged or hidden or left in a garage for 30 years because nobody had the time or the knowledge or the willingness to look closely enough. And the question of what that thing is worth, really worth, the full weight of it, depends entirely on whether someone does the work of looking. He'd looked, that was all. He'd looked at a burned car that everyone else had walked past, and he'd seen what was underneath the damage, and he'd committed to the work of bringing it back without knowing what it would cost or what it would come to. The car was worth what it had always been worth. Nobody had added value to it. The value was already there. It had just been waiting for someone patient enough to find it. He thought about Harold Sterling driving alone on local roads in the early morning, keeping his promise to himself in increments so small nobody noticed. He thought about a sealed letter that had traveled 31 years to go 20 feet. He thought about his daughter's hands in the dark, knocking on metal, listening. He thought that some things are hidden not because they have no value, but because the people who hid them didn't know how to offer them openly, and that the work of finding those things, the real work, the patient, unglamorous, sometimes expensive work of looking where other people haven't, is one of the more valuable things a person can do, even when nobody's watching, even when the return isn't guaranteed. Especially then. Cora's breathing was steady and even in the back seat. The city gave way to the quieter streets of Millbrook, and Jace drove with one hand on the wheel and the radio low and the particular feeling of a man who has finished something that deserved finishing and can feel in his bones that it was enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. That was the whole story.